Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 124 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Compassion and Patience, an interview with Heather Glovack. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
So, Matt, this young woman went through a really difficult journey that started during her childhood. And unfortunately, one of the most characteristic challenges she had to face was essentially self-bullying, that Heather, because she suffered severe fatigue, was bullying herself in her own mind.
So, Rich, what really stood out for me in this interview is the fact that Heather was sick for over 14 years, tried such a wide variety of treatments, and then had major success with SLT therapy, which is a cancer treatment now used in the Lyme world. And because of this, she's been able to significantly improve her health and now move on with her passion of health and fitness.
And Matt, the beauty of Heather's story is this self-bullying ultimately triggered a transformation in Heather and turned her into a more compassionate and patient person, which is why we named this podcast episode Compassion and Patience. So Matt, I'm really excited to introduce to the Tick Bootcamp community our compassionate and patient Heather Glovack.
Hey, Heather Glovack, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're really blessed to have you. I mean, I think you know we've been trying to get you on the podcast for a long, long time, and we're really blessed to finally have you share your story and your experiences with our listeners. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you. I feel very blessed to, have this opportunity to share my story.
So Heather, can you talk to us about where you live?
Yeah, I live in Hermosa Beach, California. I'm actually just maybe it's a 30-second walk from the beach. So, it's such a beautiful area. It's very laid back, which, I love. And, everyone here is so friendly. You go for a walk, they say hello. And it's just a really beautiful place to be. A lot of people consider this to be paradise. And I couldn't agree more with that.
So Heather, are you currently working?
Yeah, I am working full time. I actually work in lending now, so with mortgages. So I do commercial and residential loans, so purchase loan, refinance. We also do hard money loans, and so that keeps me busy.
So how long have you been living in paradise?
I moved here in 2010 from Chicago. So I moved from Chicago to Hermosa Beach in 2010.
And did you grow up in the Midwest?
Yeah, I actually was born and raised right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And my mom was in Royal Oak. My dad was in Bloomfield Hills. And I was there up until 2004. And I moved to Chicago in 2004.
So let's talk about your childhood and specifically what you knew about ticks and tick diseases during your childhood. Were you tick aware, and did you receive any education about ticks and Lyme disease during your childhood in the Midwest?
Absolutely not. I didn't even know what a tick was. Maybe my parents knew. However, it wasn't something we ever talked about. I think, there might have been a couple times later on, when I was in Chicago, I may have heard of this, but it wasn't something that was ever talked about. It wasn't something, I would even hear about. I didn't know anyone that had Lyme disease. Up until college, one of my neighbors, my mom called me to tell me that she had Lyme disease, and I had no idea what that meant, what the symptoms were, or how, the severity of it. So very little education surrounding Lyme disease and ticks.
So now, Heather, when did you first begin to show what you now know to be the symptoms of your tick disease?
So, after my diagnosis, I did a lot of reflecting because it was something that I didn't understand. And I remember, for me personally, I remember in high school, I did really well in high school, but I remember I had such a hard time staying awake in class. It came to the point where, some of my friends would ask, why are you so tired? And it was something I couldn't even articulate, the fatigue that I felt. It was this uncontrollable fatigue that if I didn't close my eyes and rest my head, I would fall over. And when you're that young and, you know, you don't understand what is going on in your body, it's very frustrating. I remember I would beat myself up. I thought, why are you so lazy? Why are you so tired? What is wrong with you? And I would have these really debilitating conversations with myself. And, you know, looking back, that definitely added fuel to the fire and, you know, to the severity of it. So back in high school, I definitely started to, fatigue was my first symptom. I mean, severe fatigue.
So Heather, your self-talk was really mean, meaning you were almost bullying yourself because of the way you felt and calling yourself lazy. How are the other people in your life treating you when you were exhibiting these symptoms of fatigue?
Yeah, that's such a great question. You know, I think some of my teachers, you know, maybe weren't so nice. Although I think that they were surprised that I would still maintain good grades. I just remember, you know, getting in trouble for resting my head. And, you know, if I'm being honest, I can share a story. There was one time where I did fall asleep in class and the teacher had everyone leave the room. And then the bell went off and I was in the room by myself. And, you know, as I look back and think about that story, you know, it was really hurtful because not only was I frustrated with myself, I was scared because I didn't understand what was going on with me. And I felt almost, you know, judged because of the amount of fatigue I would experience. And because I didn't know how to articulate the way I felt, or maybe I was embarrassed to share how I felt, it was, you know, it was really debilitating.
Now, Heather, how did your peers treat you when, not just this one incident where your teacher embarrassed you, but just generally, clearly you were having symptomology that the rest of your peers weren't having? Were your friends suggesting that you were lazy? Were your friends isolating you or not inviting you to different events? How did this present in your social circle?
You know, I was really blessed to have an amazing group of girlfriends, and not once did I ever feel judged by them. I know I had two friends that were just so caring and nurturing, and I remember even when I would come over to their house, they would just let me nap, and you know, that I think that brought me a sense of comfort. And you know, I was very fortunate that my friends were understanding and, you know, not judgmental. They didn't push me out by any means. If anything, I think it made them care for me more. So in that respect, I was very fortunate.
So how did your family react to your fatigue and you presenting very differently than other people your age?
Yeah, you know, my parents were never you know, mean to me about it. Excuse me. And I remember, you know, my mom and dad just being concerned. And, you know, I wish that Lyme disease, you know, had come to the surface, you know, at least in the area that I lived in a bit sooner, because, you know, I did go through some testing and it just seemed like, you know, we couldn't really find what was going on. And I remember both of my parents would mention, you know, you're so tired all the time. And I think they thought maybe I was staying up too late or, you know, going out with friends too often. And I was a competitive gymnast. So I think because of that, they thought maybe it was because, you know, I would spend on average, you know, 4 to 5 hours a day in the gym. So I think they kind of connected the fatigue with, oh, well, you know, she's an athlete and she's always on the go. So I think because of that, maybe it got dismissed around that time.
So what other symptoms were developing as your fatigue was setting in during your high school years?
Yeah, so definitely fatigue. And I remember I did experience some weight gain, which was confusing because, you know, my diet has always been pretty healthy. I was very fortunate because my dad, he's just a health nut, very active. So, you know, he introduced me to that lifestyle at a very young age. But so the weight gain was very interesting. And I remember being easily triggered. So if there was a loud noise, I remember I've always been very sensitive to scent, especially around high school. And I remember having light sensitivity, and especially inside. I remember the classroom lights. I would always, I would develop like a dull headache, and I just remember thinking, oh, these lights. And I always just blamed it on, oh, well, maybe I just don't like fluorescent lights. But now connecting the dots, that makes sense.
So you start to have these symptoms, which are now looking back, classic Lyme disease symptoms, where you're having issues with sense, you're having issues with light, you're having extreme fatigue. Did you visit any doctors, and at any point did any doctor suggest that perhaps you should be tested for Lyme disease?
No, never.
So now let's go forward. You're going through your high school years, you ultimately go to college. Talk to us about what your college experience was like and how your symptoms developed during your college years.
Yeah, college, you know, that was the time I think that was a pretty scary time. I actually spent a night in the hospital. I was hooked up to heart monitor. I had EKG done. I'll go over some of my symptoms. Again, the fatigue. Although, you know, I was a full-time student, I actually had 3 jobs. I was, you know, I had great grades, but, you know, the fatigue, you know, was very persistent. I was experiencing heart palpitations, depression, anxiety, and that's when the dizziness started to set in also. And I did find a doctor there, and that's when the thyroid issue came up.
And when you say the thyroid issue came up, what do you mean by that?
So I was diagnosed with hypothyroid. And I think at that time they were like, oh, well, this is what's going on. So we'll give you, some Synthroid and you should feel better.
Now, we've interviewed many folks who have been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and as it turns out, it was actually just a symptom similar to Lyme. It was, in fact, Lyme disease. Do you think the diagnosis was proper? And do you think that diagnosis was triggered by your Lyme disease, or do you think it was an improper diagnosis?
You know, I believe I do have a thyroid issue, but I absolutely believe that the root cause is the Lyme disease, 100%.
Okay, so now you have, again, even a greater number of very classic Lyme disease symptoms, and you now have, you're presenting with another symptom, which is hypothyroidism. Did any of the doctors that you were treating with during this hospital stay suggest to you that you should be evaluated for Lyme disease or tested for Lyme disease?
Nope. That wasn't even a conversation that we had.
So now, move us forward. You're now released from the hospital. You go back to living the life of a very busy college student. And how are your symptoms progressing, and what doctors are you seeing?
So I was only seeing a primary doctor, and the symptoms, all of them, still consistent. And then I remember I had some pretty severe gut issues that started to trickle in. And that's when it really became overwhelming, because not only am I tired, I'm experiencing, pretty severe dizziness. Now what feels like depression. And then, to top it off, I'm having, just excruciating, pain in, in my stomach, nausea that would last days, sometimes weeks, and just, a wide variety of GI issues, constipation, diarrhea. I know that's, TMI, but, I'm just trying to be real, and just bloating that was so painful. I remember telling the doctor, it feels like someone is inside of my stomach and they're pressing their fist out. And, that's when, things got really bad.
Now, Heather, you shared with us that you were essentially bullying yourself with the voices in your own head. As all of these symptoms were developing now through your college years, how were the voices in your head treating you?
I think at that point, because other symptoms were coming to the surface, it wasn't because of the symptoms I gave myself a little bit of grace, but it really allowed me to see that, hey, something is actually going on here. And, I tried to separate that from blaming myself. So I'm not saying it was easy by any means. And I still had moments where, I was just like, what are you doing wrong? And, you should try harder, to, eat healthier or not go out so much. And so I still struggled with the, inner self-talk, but I remember it easing up a bit because, it wasn't just because I was tired. Things were really coming to the surface.
What about your social circle? How are your friends treating you now that you have these developing symptoms and you're not able to be as social as you would like to be, or they would like you to be?
Again, for some reason, I've been so blessed with all my friends. And even in college, I still keep in touch with all my friends from college, and they are angels. And not once did I ever feel judged or ridiculed. So, in that sense, I was very blessed.
How is your family helping you with your developing symptoms? Meaning, were they encouraging you to go to doctors, and were they encouraging you to seek additional diagnoses when you were continuing to have symptoms develop and really not getting any relief?
Yeah, I remember my dad was so worried about me, and I probably went to my primary care doctor, a couple times a month, because it came to the point where, I would call and I would be in tears and we just weren't getting any answers. And, they knew I was seeking help. I was going to this primary care doctor, and I believe, I was doing the best I could with the doctor I had. And it just seemed like every time I'd go in, it was a thyroid, and then let's try this antidepressant medication. And it was just, I just felt like I was going in circles. So, my parents were worried, but I think I gave them a sense of peace because I was actively seeking help from my primary care physician.
Now, Heather, these symptoms continued to develop all the way until you were 31 years old when you finally got your Lyme disease diagnosis, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And how many different doctors did you see between the time that you were in this sort of loop with this doctor who was not helping you and then finally getting your diagnosis at 31?
Yeah, so when I was in Chicago, I only, I stuck with that primary care doctor because I don't even know if, functional medicine doctors or, I know, Chinese medicine has been around for forever, but in regards to, functional medicine or homeopathic, that wasn't even something I was really aware of or knew was accessible to me. And I was in college, so I think funds, like financial situation had a lot to do with that also. So in Chicago, I only saw one doctor, but it wasn't until I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it wasn't until I moved to California that I was presented with some alternative, doctors.
Okay, so let's talk about you staying with the one doctor, and I hope this question doesn't sound mean, but I do think it's important that I ask the question. When you were in this loop where you weren't getting better, why'd you stay with the one doctor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, maybe not taking full responsibility. So meaning not doing my own due diligence and putting all of my trust into this one doctor that she was eventually going to figure it out. And, that is something that I definitely take ownership of.
Well, let's talk about her a little bit more. Why do you think she didn't send you out to any other doctors when she, with you, was in this loop where you were going to her a couple of times a month and you were getting worse and worse? Why do you think she didn't send you out to a specialist or someone else to get a second opinion?
So, as I took the time to reflect, I honestly think she thought I was just depressed. And I think she thought, maybe I was trying to find an answer to the depression. I honestly, I think a lot of my symptoms were dismissed because I would be emotional. I'd be in her office and I would be crying. And I think, I think she just looked at me like, oh, she's going through like some severe depression. So I think, I was, although she was a very sweet and I felt her compassion, I truly believe she thought I was just, I just had depression.
Heather, of course, anyone who's getting sicker and sicker and sicker and looking for answers is going to feel depressed. I mean, that seems to me something doctors should be well prepared to deal with when they have somebody who's not getting better, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
So, one of the things that we hear from a lot of folks who we've interviewed is that they get really frustrated when doctors tell them that it's all in their head. And it almost seems to me that even if this doctor was a sweet lady, that, she was essentially saying it's all in your head. It couldn't be she who's failing. It's got to be you, and it's got to be in your head.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that 100% because when a doctor is doing just basic blood work and nothing is coming up, I think they automatically jump to this has to be in their head. So,
right. And, and I actually think it's worth. I think when doctors are not able to determine what's wrong with someone, they actually blame us for it rather than acknowledging their own limitations or their own failures. So she may have been sweet. She may have been kind, but she quite frankly wasn't particularly competent, and I think she was actually abusing you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about all of the other things you were misdiagnosed with, Heather, because there were many things between, this young child at 17 exhibiting these classic Lyme disease symptoms, and now this 31-year-old woman who is still sick and not getting any better despite the well-intentions of these less than competent doctors. What other things were you diagnosed or misdiagnosed with?
So I don't know that they are for sure diagnoses. I say that because when we run the test to check the numbers, they are still there. But I do believe that the Lyme is the key factor. So when I moved to California, I did, the first doctor that I came in connection with, he was really great because he tested for things that no one else had, like Epstein-Barr, Hashimoto's, and, and of course he still would test my thyroid. So, maybe the Epstein-Barr played a role in being the root cause as well. But those were the two other markers that came up, the Epstein-Barr and the Hashimoto's.
So Heather, we know that Lyme disease often can create other symptoms or even illnesses, and Lyme can generate a lot of autoimmune diseases in people, like Hashimoto's, and Lyme can also reactivate Epstein-Barr virus. So did any of your doctors at any point ever suggest or think you have classic Lyme symptoms, plus you have a lot of other diseases or illnesses that are usually the result of Lyme disease?
At that point, no. With that first doctor moving to California, no, he did not even bring up Lyme disease.
So let's talk a little bit more about what they were doing to treat these diagnoses. So the first one was the hypothyroidism, and you mentioned that you continue to feel worse afterwards. So were they giving you anything, any pharmaceuticals to treat the hypothyroidism? And if so, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, so I did start on the Synthroid. But in regards to the Hashimoto's and Epstein-Barr, nothing was done. And I remember, like it was yesterday, that doctor, when he came in the room to go over my results, he looked at me and he said, "I feel so sorry for you. My daughter has Epstein-Barr and Hashimoto's, and your life is going to be different." And I just remember leaving, and I thought to myself, no, that's not going to be me, and I'm going to find a way to heal myself and get better. So, like I said, nothing was done for the Hashimoto's or Epstein-Barr at that point, but I was put on Synthroid.
Did the Synthroid help you in any way, or were there any negative side effects, or was there just no reaction at all to that medication?
At that point, I had no reaction at all.
And another common thing is we've heard from many past podcast guests that Hashimoto's and Epstein-Barr and a lot of these types of illnesses can be effectively treated using natural treatments or holistic treatments like herbs and supplements. Was this ever discussed with your doctor in California once you got diagnosed with Hashimoto's and Epstein-Barr?
At that point, with that doctor, no.
So now at this point, just to put in perspective, how old were you and where were you at in your life at this point when you were in California? Now you have Hashimoto's, you have Epstein-Barr, and you have hypothyroidism.
Yeah, so that was around 2011, and I remember this day perfectly also, because the fatigue again it was bad. I was on the phone with my mom. I was driving home from work, and I said, "Mom, I'm going to pull over and I need to close my eyes." It was that bad. And it's not like I had an hour commute. I'm talking, on a day without traffic, 20 minutes. So I pulled over into a parking lot, and I woke up. It had to have been 4 hours later. I was sweating. My body was drenched. I had like 30 missed calls from my mom, and she said, "If you don't find a doctor that can help you, your dad and I are going to have to either come there or you're going to need to come home because this is really scaring us." And that was kind of my wake-up call that this isn't a life that I could live much longer, because first of all, pulling over on the side of the road is not safe, to sleep. And I was miserable.
Heather, did you believe your diagnoses at this point? So you're about 25, right? You're living in California, you're away from your family, and your primary care physician now in California is saying you're gonna have to live with this, and these are illnesses that you just have to manage, and there's nothing we can do. Did you accept these diagnoses, or were you always questioning, was there something deeper causing your symptoms?
Oh, I definitely questioned, reading the symptoms of Epstein-Barr and Hashimoto's. I was like, okay, well, they are, they're in connection, and okay, maybe that is true, but my gut told me that, there was something else that we were missing, especially because he couldn't even offer a treatment at that point for the Hashimoto's or Epstein-Barr. And that's when I think I started to talk about my situation a little bit more, because not that I was ashamed of myself, but I was a little embarrassed that I was experiencing, it's not easy to tell someone that you have to pull over and take a nap in your car on your 20-minute ride home from work. But after, I started to wake up and realize the severity of all this, I did start to talk to friends and coworkers, and that's kind of when things started to work in my favor, because I was introduced to a couple different doctors.
So I think what you just said is a really important lesson for those that are listening. And I myself did the same thing, where you're ashamed of your symptoms and you don't want to speak about your illness. So you just pretend that everything is okay for the most part. So, thinking back, would you recommend for yourself and others who are going through the same situation that they be more vocal and open about their symptoms, and that may help them shortcut themselves to a faster diagnosis potentially?
Oh, absolutely. I think we come up with these stories in our head, and sometimes they're a bit wild, and you think that people are going to judge you or maybe look at you different. But in my experience, wow, I was blown away with how many people truly wanted to help me and see me healthy. So that was absolutely a learning lesson for me. And I'll be honest, I still struggle sometimes with being fully transparent with the way I feel, whether it's, at work or friends or family. So, that is something that I still work on. But absolutely, if I could go back and do it again, I truly believe I would have gotten to the root cause much faster.
So Heather, talk to us more now about you're opening up to your friends and family members. And at this point, do you finally see a specialist or specialists, plural, to identify maybe other things that are going on that could be causing your other symptoms?
Eventually, it did lead to that. I was first introduced to a couple Chinese medicine doctors, and I found a lot of success with one in particular, but it almost felt as if, it would get me to a good place for a couple of weeks, and then boom, I'm right back to square one. So although I believe that that type of treatment works, for me, it wasn't enough to keep my head above water or, to create some stability for me. So I believe that it did help, and that was one of the things that opened my eyes to alternative doctors and treatments.
So can you give us an example? So now this is obviously pre-Lyme diagnosis, and these Chinese medicine doctors were trying to help you with your symptoms, but they didn't know what the root cause was to help identify tools to treat the root cause. So your symptoms kept persisting after these Chinese medicine treatments. So can you give us an idea what some of these treatments were that helped you get temporary relief from your symptoms?
Yeah, so the first Chinese medicine doctor that I was introduced to was, he mainly did reflexology and, on the feet. And he also gave me some herbs. And I will say that I actually went off the Synthroid and went on to herbs and consistently did see him for the reflexology. So for a while that did work, and I just got to a point where it wasn't enough. And, with Lyme, if you're not treating the Lyme, your symptoms will persist. So after that, I, because I had been in the fitness industry, I was fortunate enough to meet a client that also recommended two doctors, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, so please stop me if I'm doing that. One of the Chinese medicine doctors was a energy muscle tester, and that she was great, and again, worked, but just wasn't enough because, we weren't treating the Lyme. We were treating the symptoms that were probably the result of the Lyme. And then I also went to another doctor who, he did some alternative frequency energy testing and treatment.
So Heather, for those that are listening that don't know what foot reflexology is, because that seemed to help you get off the medication you're on for your hypothyroidism, can you describe for listeners what foot reflexology is and how it helped you?
Yeah, so the Dr. Chin, the doctor that I was seeing, it's actually pretty aggressive. And I remember thinking, wow, this really hurts. But there are points in our feet that are connected to different organs and parts of our body. And, I'm sorry if I don't perfectly describe this. I don't, know exactly the science behind it. But from what, I can articulate is that when those points are rubbed or massaged, they help the process of healing the organs that are suffering.
You also mentioned that you did some energy and frequency testing and treatments. So can you go into a little bit more detail about what that means and describe what that was like?
Yeah, so Dr. Gallister, he's actually in Santa Monica. And again, I apologize if I don't describe this perfectly, but he uses a lot of German technology. So he would put vials on me, vials of different, whether it's supplements or viruses, bacteria, and he had a frequency machine, and depending on how the frequency machine reacted, it would be either something was happening or going on, or there was a supplement or herb that my body needed. So a lot of times it would be testing the liver, the adrenals, pituitary gland, and I did find a lot of success, although it sounds a little woo-woo and questionable. It is something that I truly believe in, and I think it did help me. It would help get my head above water for a short period of time.
What's surprising to me, Heather, is that we've had a lot of past guests who have had success with energy and frequency treatments and also diagnostic tools to diagnose Lyme disease. And it seems like this doctor was able to help you get some relief, but couldn't identify Lyme disease as being the cause. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And all of this still is pre-Lyme. So were there any other treatments you did now that you were seeking to get help and understanding that you needed to do something to increase your quality of life? Were there any other treatments that you did before your Lyme diagnosis?
So I was referred to a integrative GI doctor, and he put me on a gut protocol, and he is actually the one that mentioned Lyme disease to me. And I can kind of share how that story went if you want.
That'd be perfect, please.
Yeah. So his name is Dr. Rabar. He's out in Beverly Hills, and I was working with him for a long time, and this is when my symptoms were pretty bad. I would go to work, and this was when I was a trainer and a yoga and group fitness instructor. And I remember I would have to hold on to the wall because I was so dizzy. I would literally have to run out of my class to use the restroom. And that in itself is, debilitating. It's embarrassing to have to step out like that. And there was a point where I had to crawl up the stairs. I was so weak, I couldn't even walk up one flight of stairs at my house. And then I had a very traumatic GI episode, and I was sent in for an emergency endoscopy, and Dr. Rabar was the one that performed that. And he sat down with me after, and he held my hand and he was just so sweet. And he noticed that I had this little bump on my left hand, which I always thought and was told was a skin tag. And he said, "How long have you had that?" And I said, "Oh, well, this happened in college." And he said, "Okay, let's talk a little bit more." And I think we sat there for like an hour, and he goes, "Now that I think of it, your symptoms are very much in alignment with a lot of my Lyme patients." And he said, "Have you been tested for Lyme?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, I think it's time that we test you for that." And we did. I did the Western blot, and I also did a DNA connections urine test, and both came back positive.
So it seems like you finally got your Lyme diagnosis because a doctor, and I don't want to say that the others didn't, but a doctor genuinely cared about you and spent the time over an hour to talk with you about your life and what was going on, to then use that discussion to come to the conclusion that most of what you're saying lines up with Lyme disease. Had any other doctor prior to this given you that amount of time or that amount of care to try to diagnose your illness?
No. And above and beyond the time he spent with me, it's just like the way that he acknowledged me and looked at me, and even him just simply holding my hand when I was so scared it was like, wow, like someone is hearing me right now. So yeah, I'm forever grateful to him.
And what type of doctor was he?
He was actually a GI, an integrative GI specialist.
Well, I think the key there is that he was an integrative GI specialist. And from our experience, it's generally integrative doctors. When we leave typical Western medicine is when we get the compassion and care and ultimately the diagnosis that we really have. So you mentioned that he noticed a bump on your hand when he was holding your hand after your emergency endoscopy. Did he believe that that was a scar or bump as a result of a tick bite you had gotten when you were in college?
No. So this is a bit embarrassing, but it ended up being a wart. And I don't know, I never actually researched, Lyme and warts, but for some reason that tipped him off. He looked at it and he's like, "How long have you had this? And have you tried to, get rid of it? Does it keep coming back?" And for some reason, that right there, he was like, "Huh, all of this is in alignment with his other Lyme patients that, he had."
So Heather, when you did the LabCorp test and the DNA connection urine test, did you test for any other co-infections or just Lyme at the time?
Yeah, I did test for co-infections, and I had a handful come back. Of course, the Borrelia, and then I apologize if I butcher the Burgdorferi and Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia. Yeah, so I did have a handful come back.
So let's talk about how you felt at this point, because now, how old are you at this point?
I was 31.
So this was 14 years after you first got sick, and you finally get a diagnosis that we now believe actually was the root cause of your symptoms that developed when you were 17 years old. So describe for us what that was like to get this positive diagnosis of Lyme and all these co-infections from this integrative GI doctor that you found.
Oh, I mean, I was over the moon. I remember, everyone was like, "I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "For what?" Because I'm a very action, goal-oriented person. And I knew, I was going to follow the protocol to a T. And I knew having that diagnosis, I could do everything in my power, that was accessible to me at that point to get better. And now that I had a proper diagnosis, I could do my own due diligence. I could, find a support group and all of that, gave me such a sense of ease and peace. Maybe I had small, a short amount of time where I might have been a little discouraged with the diagnosis, but, I felt just so lucky to have an answer.
So talk to us about what this doctor's appointment was like when you got your diagnosis. Did your doctor tell you this was going to be a long journey to recovery? Was it more happy and optimistic? I mean, obviously you were excited to have a real diagnosis, but did he at the time set forth a realistic expectation of what your future was going to be like for your treatment plan?
So what I appreciate about Dr. Rabar is just he has such a great perspective, and he's just he's just a bright light. And that's what I really appreciate about him. And, something he said to me that also gave me a sense of peace is, he said, "You're going to get better. You're going to get better. Don't worry." And that definitely, set the tone that, hey, I'm going to get better. It might take time, but here's a doctor that has many Lyme patients, and he's obviously on to something. And, that definitely gave me some hope and a sense of peace.
So now, did he work with you to develop a treatment plan, or did he refer you to an infectious disease doctor or a neurologist or another doctor to treat you for your Lyme disease?
Yeah, he actually referred me to Dr. Lehman in Beverly Hills, who is an infectious disease specialist and also a Lyme literate doctor.
And how long did it take for you to get in to see Dr. Lehman? We've heard a lot about her on social media and just in the Lyme community. So was it a lengthy wait to get in to see this Lyme literate specialist near where you lived?
No, I think I got in that next week. I actually think it was just a couple days later, because I remember he had emailed her all of my history right away, because, she could get me in. I don't know if he called her and, shared the case with her or the severity of it, but I did get in right away.
So let's talk about that appointment. So a few days later now, you're going to this Lyme literate infectious disease specialist. And what was the treatment plan that you were given to move forward and start to heal from Lyme disease?
So the first treatment plan was antibiotics.
Do you recall
and
the
it was
type of antibiotics?
Yeah, we did Flagyl. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. And I remember Zithromax, doxycycline, and I remember that there was one other one. Then we also did nystatin, diflucan. It was a wide variety, and in my heart, I believe that is what we had to do to kill the bad bugs. But after, I believe it was about 9 months, I was tapped out. I couldn't do the antibiotics anymore. I was done. I knew that I had reached my limit, and we had to try something different.
So how are you feeling throughout this 9 months? You were on a pretty heavy combination of antibiotics and other medications, which really could have a lot of side effects with these medications too. So were you getting relief from your symptoms? Were you feeling worse before you started to feel better? Give us an idea of that 9-month period and how you felt during that treatment window.
I actually started to feel better for a bit. And then I think the antibiotics just became too much, especially with my gut. And I just remember feeling like I was in a fog. I remember I would get agitated easily. And I just remember there came a point where I was like, you know what, I can't do the antibiotics anymore. I just can't. And then, we switched.
And that you're tapping out from the antibiotics. I mean, it took its toll on your gut. It just started having some too strong side effects. You were on them for 9 months. You've made some progress, but now you're going to pivot to another treatment option at that point. So what was next in your treatment plan? And were you still staying with the same doctor? Were you seeing any other doctors at this time?
So I did stay with Dr. Lehman, and at that time, I did have a pretty good savings. So I did as much as I could with what I had. And we did introduce ozone and IV nutrients and, a wide variety of herbs. And I remember that definitely, it did help. And we did a lot of gut repair because, with the antibiotics, as you know, it takes its toll.
So at this point, the ozone that you were getting, above and beyond all the IV nutrients and the herbs, was the ozone being administered intravenously through an IV? Was it being done, in a different way? What type of ozone therapy were you getting at this point?
So I was doing IV and here and there rectal.
And looking back, do you think that ozone therapy helped you in your journey, or was it something that you tried and you felt just didn't help you and then you had to move on to the next thing?
I think it did help. And I also think that ozone is really great for maintenance, but I'm just not convinced it was enough for me at that point.
So how long were you on the herbs, the IV nutrients, and the ozone? How long were you on those for before you decided that they weren't working and you moved to another treatment plan?
Yeah, so I was with Dr. Lehman up until 2019, and with all due respect, she's a very busy doctor, and I just think that she was too busy to offer the amount of support I needed. So I started to do research, and she's a brilliant doctor. She's great. But I just needed a little more support, and I started to do some research, and I found the whole TORF group, and I started there with Dr. Evans, but then I was referred out to Dr. Hunt because Dr. Hunt is, the top Lyme disease doctor at the whole TORF group. And I started there in November of 2019. And within a couple of weeks of seeing Dr. Hunt, I was a completely different person.
So before we go there, Heather, do you feel that the herbs and the ozone therapy, the rectal and IV ozone therapy, and the IV nutrients and everything you were doing in your second phase with Dr. Lehman helped you a little bit further in your journey? So the antibiotics for 9 months, then the combination of the herbs, the nutrients through IV, and the ozone, they helped you get a little bit better. But it sounds like when you started, late last year in 2019 with Dr. Hunt from the Holtfort group, that he changed your protocol. So was when you started, was your protocol changed, or did he keep you on what Dr. Lehman had you on?
No, I will say, Dr. Lehman, she definitely got my head above water, and I did start to see glimpses of like my old self coming back in terms of, having days where I felt good. But when I went to the whole TORF group, I brought my bag of supplements, and basically she was like, we're going to stop all of that. That's too much. And that was also relieving to me because I had, supplement fatigue for sure. And so to answer your question, my protocol was completely shifted and changed.
So let's talk about that. How many supplements were you taking on a daily basis while you were with Dr. Lehman before you switched over to Dr. Hunt?
Well, I had at least, I brought like a grocery bag full, so I would say probably about 30.
And that's not uncommon. If we actually did a poll recently on our Instagram story, and many people when treating with Lyme take anywhere between 20 and some people upwards of 70 supplements per day. So unfortunately, that is not uncommon for people with Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. But it seems like you made a little bit of progress with Dr. Lehman, but you really, the game changer and what really was the biggest improvement in your health came when you found Dr. Hunt and shortly after you found Dr. Hunt. So we're excited to hear about what those treatment options were that you changed to when you saw Dr. Hunt that really were the game changer in your recovery.
Yeah, so I think there were a few game changers. So one would be, Dr. Hunt, just like Dr. Rabar, she sat down with me and she didn't have her phone in the room. She didn't have people coming in and distracting her. She wasn't checking her email while she was in the session with me. She was truly there with me. And that, first and foremost, almost takes, some weight off your shoulders. And I think mentally and emotionally, that was a part of the healing as well. And then as far as the treatment plan that was shifted, I'll also mention that the whole Torf group is half the cost. So ozone is accessible to me multiple times a week now. IVs are accessible to me multiple times a week. So the cost was at least cut in half, sometimes more. And I think that played a huge part in my healing, to not have the financial stress. And then, of course, we can get into the treatment plan. So, I still continued the 10 pass, sometimes 8, depending on time, of ozone. I was doing, high dose nutrient IV, including glutathione, and Plaquex was introduced, which that was an amazing, that was a game changer for me. And then
what is Plaquex? What type of medicine is that?
So Plaquex helps, it's like a binder, but beyond that, so it pulls out toxins, but it also helps repair cells from what I've read. And that, when I leave after a Plaquex IV, I just feel amazing. So I'll do, 8 to 10, depending on how much I have, 8 to 10 pass of ozone. I'll do glutathione, a high dose nutrient IV bag, and then the Plaquex. And I just leave and I feel great. And we also introduced the NAD, and here and there I will add in ketamine IV.
So can you talk to us about what is NAD? That's an IV infusion?
Yeah, so my experience with NAD, and I know a lot of Lyme patients suffer from brain fog. My brain fog, it absolutely has gotten better, but there, was a time where it was really bad, and I know a lot of people can relate to, it's very embarrassing because your capacity to retain or understand or even hold a conversation is challenging. I mean, there were times, and it still pops up here and there. There were times I'd be in mid-conversation and I would be like, what was I even just saying? And I just blanked. So the NAD has really helped with that, as well as energy. And I also felt as if once I introduced the NAD, my ability to work out longer or with more intensity also increased.
So can you talk to us more about how the ketamine IV helped you? We've actually had some other podcast guests describe that ketamine had helped them as well, but we want to hear how it has helped, what ketamine is generally used for and how it helped you in your healing journey.
So I started doing ketamine actually after my mom passed because it was suggested to me to start taking Zoloft, and that just didn't resonate with me. So Dr. Hunt, recommended ketamine for depression, but also on a preventative measure. You know, because with Lyme, you're already, you know, I don't think it's uncommon to feel down and blue and a little depressed when you're, you know, handling life and relationships. And then on top of it, you're in this constant battle every day to feel well and to do your daily tasks. So I'm very thankful that that was introduced to me. So the experience is interesting, but I just, you know, I try to close my eyes. I'll bring my headphones, you know, because that's what makes me feel comfortable, at least. And so the experience is interesting. And even about 15 minutes after the IV, you feel a little, what I describe as loopy, maybe even a little drunk. But for me, that has really helped, not only with my mood, but I wake up and I'm just like, wow, I'm so grateful. Like, I just wake up with this sense of gratitude. And I noticed that shift after starting the ketamine IV.
So, you know, most people with Lyme have these feelings of depression or anxiety, and they struggle because, number one, when you're that sick, of course you're going to be depressed. And number two, Lyme actually does create these symptoms. They actually will Lyme can make you depressed. That is a symptom of Lyme disease. So it sounds like for those that are really struggling with their mental health, maybe ketamine can help them have a more positive outlook and bounce back from this depression. Is that an accurate assessment of, in your mind, what ketamine can do for people with Lyme?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And in addition to ketamine, I mean, it seems like Dr. Hunt really hit every piece of your illness, from the emotional to the physical to the detox to the rebuilding of you know, the strengthening of your cells. Was there anything else after the ketamine IVs that really helped you with Dr. Hunt?
Oh, yes. I forgot to mention SOT therapy. I believe that, I mean, you know, everyone is different, but that has helped me so much. I'm actually going to do it again, you know, come September, which it basically already is. But yeah, the SOT for me, I mean, it has created, you know, a sustainable, you know, wellness health for me. So.
Can you talk to us more about what SOT is? We've actually heard about it a few times, and almost everybody we've spoken to about SOT has said that it's been very helpful in their recovery from Lyme disease.
Yeah, so, you know, the nurse took my blood and then they send it to a lab in Greece. And from what I've been told, they magnify the blood by 3,000%. So that they can see exactly what is happening in you and not just in a general sense. And then they create a IV bag and then they send it back. And then it is, you know, it is an IV. And I think it took about 2 weeks for me to feel anything. And then even after that 2 weeks, it was slowly. And then I just remember waking up and I was working out like I used to. And I felt like at work, my performance, you know, really increased. And I was social again. And I was going out with my friends. And, you know, not in excess by any means, but I was able to tolerate a glass or two of champagne or, you know, a spicy margarita, you know, and that was not, you know, my ability to tolerate alcohol was very low. So I had noticed that as well.
From how we understand it, SOT really creates the shutoff key or shuts down the bacteria that you have in your body. So you send away your blood. I don't think they can do this here in the States, but they analyze it overseas, and they use the examination of your blood to develop the shutoff key, essentially, to then be injected back into you to sort of, you know, neutralize or kill the Lyme bacteria. Is that an accurate assessment of what you think SOT is? We're just trying to get a better understanding of how it works.
Oh, yeah. So how it's been described to me, it can't actually kill it, but it can stop it from growing and taking over. So I hope that clarifies.
It does. Thank you. So it seems like that SOT, the Plaquex, I'm butchering that word, I apologize. And the SOT, the Plaquex, which I don't know why I'm saying it that way, and NAD were the real big game changers for you. Were those the top three that you think were helpful in your recovery?
Yeah, and I can actually say that with complete confidence because even my dad, he was like, wow, you just even sound better. You know, because my dad lives in Michigan and he knows when we're on the phone, he's like, oh, you're not feeling well. And, you know, about a couple weeks into the SOT, he's like, wow, you sound like a completely different person. He's like, I'm just so happy. And so it wasn't just me that noticed the results. It was other people also.
And now all of this was over the last 3 years from essentially when you got diagnosed and then you started seeing Dr. Hunt is really when you had the major progress. Were there any other therapies that you've done with Dr. Hunt in addition to these therapies you outlined in chronological order that you feel have been helpful in your Lyme recovery?
Yeah, I would like to mention, the infrared sauna. And I, fortunately, in my town, there's a wellness studio, and the woman that owns the studio has infrared pods that are lined with crystals, which, I love. So that really attracted me to doing that. And then also lymphatic massage while you're in the infrared pod. And what I'll say about infrared, it's almost like instant gratification, for me at least. So if I'm feeling lousy, I'll go, I leave, I feel better. Again, it's not something that I think will create, stability long term, but I really believe that if you're feeling bad, really bad, and you go, more than likely, you'll feel better. Also, I just started adding in endermology, which is a lymphatic massage. And that, because I know this is common with a lot of Lyme patients, is a lot of neck pain, joint pain. And ever since I've been doing that, I try to go 2 times a week if time permits, and that has really helped also. I've also added in Bpc157, which has been a game changer too if you're struggling with any gut issues. That has really, really helped also.
So Heather, could you talk to us more about what is Bpc157? You mentioned that it helps with your gut health, but what exactly is that?
Yeah, so how it's been described to me, so you can actually do Bpc157 orally, and you can actually do injections. It's a peptide. So I was at one point doing both, but injecting myself just is not appealing to me, and I noticed I was not doing it consistently because I just did not like, the injection. So I've been sticking with the oral supplement, and what I've been told is that it helps repair damaged tissues, and it also helps repair your gut. So if you have leaky gut, I believe it helps with candida as well, or any gut imbalance. But for me, it was to repair my gut because we did a stool test that came back. I had leaky gut. So the Bpc157 is a peptide, and that has really helped personally for my gut issues. But I've done some reading about the injections and how if you have an injury, it really speeds up the healing process.
It seems like to us that once you have late stage or chronic Lyme, that there's not one thing you can do to get better. And really, it's different for everybody depending on their body, their DNA, the type of Lyme strain they have, plus the co-infections. But you have found a combination of things to help alleviate some of your symptoms in the short term, the emotional symptoms, the physical symptoms, and also address the root cause of Lyme and the co-infections, and have had major success in doing so, thankfully, to the help of these great doctors you have found, and also able to do it in a more affordable manner. So as a result of all these things, how would you assess your health today? What percentage would you say you were recovered from your Lyme disease and co-infections?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say before my mom passed, I was at about 80%. And, my mom passed, and I think, with anyone, it would cause a little bit of a flare up. And, I'm working through that right now, and I can tell, I'm slowly progressing back. But right now, I would say about 70%, and it's mostly fatigue and brain fog. And I know that those symptoms are also connected to grieving. So I don't want to blame it all on the Lyme in this moment, but I would say, I'm at a solid 70% right now.
Sarah, we're really sorry for the passing of your mom, and we're sorry for, of course, the additional impact that it's having on you. The stress, of course, is causing a suppression of your immune system, and you're getting, I guess, a revival of some of your symptoms. So we're so sorry for both your loss and for the challenges that the loss is causing you physically.
Yeah, thank you.
So, but we also need to talk to you about your transformation, which has been unbelievably beautiful. I mean, you went from being this, very sick person who was having all kinds of challenges get diagnosed, to now being a very public person and a very vulnerable person who is now reaching out to folks in the Lyme community. So you can talk about how you went through that transformation from being this person on a diagnostic journey and of course being very sick, to now being this vulnerable person who's reaching out to people in the Lyme community and trying to help them shortcut their journeys.
Well, I think one thing that, having, been faced with Lyme disease is you really develop compassion and patience for others, first and foremost. The experience of being ill to the point where you're crawling up the stairs, you're sweating through the night, your bed is wet, and because of that, your work is compromised. That in itself is a challenge. But when you come out of that, at least for me, it's almost, it almost feels like your responsibility to make sure no one ever goes through what you went through. And I believe that that's what Lyme has taught me, compassion, patience, but also when you succeed from something that was so challenging and debilitating, you have to share that. You have to, even if that treatment plan or that, peace of mind doesn't help them, it might help someone else that they know, or it might lead them to the right treatment plan. And that was the moment I started to come out of, the darkness. I was like, I need to help people. I need to reach out. I'm still not 100% vulnerable in terms of sharing everything. I mean, with you and with Red Out Lyme, yes, but on my personal page, I still struggle a little bit, so I'll take ownership of that. But in terms of my motivation to reach out and help support and guide, that is absolutely, priority and my mission.
So let's speak about one more thing that I agree with you is a part of the responsibility that all people who have been on this type of journey should assume. And you're doing it beautifully. You did it certainly wonderfully right at Lyme, and you're doing it beautifully here with us today. Talk to us about what would happen if, God forbid, one of your good friends came into your room right now and showed you they were being bitten by a tick. What would you recommend that he or she do so that they wouldn't have a terrible Lyme disease journey the way you had?
Yeah, I would, 100% have them send that tick out to be tested. And I think because I'm so sensitive to all of this and I know the severity of it, I would more than likely suggest that they either find the herbs that work, but for me, I would probably go for the antibiotics. And because I think it's, you have 24, 48 hours, before things start to really develop. So, I would absolutely suggest get in, whether it's urgent care, if you can't get into your doctor, I would handle it right away.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with Heather Glovack. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about the compassionate and patient Heather Glovack and her Lyme disease journey, please visit her Instagram page at Just Glow With It. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of this post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick by Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been provided to us by past guests on this podcast. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or improvements you would like to offer to the blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us an honest review and rating on iTunes or our website. We thank you for listening.